Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I begin in the name of Allah, the God whose mercy is profound, whose kindness is forever. Why should we feel good to be Muslims? Uh, this is my fourth presentation on the topic. Today I am going to talk about the concept of God. The concept and understanding of God our religion presents is clear, understandable, and convincing. Quite often, it's assumed that the religion talks about certain beliefs and it expects its followers to have belief, faith in them uh, dogmatically. Uh, it's considered blind faith. You believe in your faith, in your different uh, beliefs, because you've been asked to do so. Why? Well, there's no logical, convincing reasoning. However, when we read the Quran uh, with a view to understand why is it that the Quran is asking us to believe in certain beliefs, what we find to our pleasant surprise is that the Quran is making sure that we believe in different elements of faith in a way that we feel convinced. Our intellect is made to be satisfied. So, for instance, when we talk about belief in God, we come to learn about the fact that the three different ways humans acknowledge realities are all satisfied. Humans quite often uh, believe in, acknowledge, or feel comfortable with the existence of the realities either on the basis of their sense perception or are convinced about the presence of a certain reality on the basis of what they already have inside them in their intuition, or they are convinced because a certain reality is intellectually convincing. Uh, let's take the first of the three possibilities of acknowledging a reality: sense perception. We see things and we acknowledge them as real. We hear them and we think that what we are hearing is real. Uh, we smell, we taste, and we touch, and we believe that what we are perceiving is real and true. This understanding of reality through sense perception is quite often also acknowledged when, if not us, somebody else has perceived a reality through these senses. Uh, that is how we acknowledge certain realities that are coming down to us through historical record. When a certain reality is talked of by a large number of people in all different periods of human history, right from the beginning when a reality was perceived, that reality is also considered to be the truth. One such reality that the Quran talks about is the fact that our ancestors, Adam and Eve, they perceived God. Did they see him? I don't know, probably not. Did they talk to him and hear what he was saying? Most probably yes. But no matter what sense perception they had applied to be able to feel the real presence of God, the Quran talks about the fact that the two had a real experience of God uh, in a garden. Uh, the Almighty talks about it in verses 34 to 39 of Surah Al Baqarah and in a number of other passages. Uh, there are at least seven different passages of the Quran where the Almighty talks about the encounter of Adam with Iblis, the Satan. Uh, this story is mentioned in the Quran in a manner that it actually happened, and it isn't metaphorical. It's a real encounter that our ancestors, great grand ancestors, had with God. Obviously, when they were ultimately asked to go to the world and live there, and they had children, uh, they must have talked about their experience with their progeny. And their progeny, in turn, must have talked to their children, and so on and so forth. So that's how this understanding of God, and obviously in other languages we've got other names for God, Allah, Khuda, etc. Uh, it's a household name. Why? Because humankind has had the understanding of the encounter or the experience of their ancestors with God, which happened right at the start of human journey. That's one of the ways humans acquire knowledge of reality. The other way is of intuition. There are many realities that humans know intuitively. Uh, the understanding of morality is one case, is one example. Our aesthetic sense is another, and so on. The Quran tells us very clearly that likewise we have an understanding of God that we have come to this world with. Uh, why? The Quran tells us why is it that we have that understanding, and answers by telling us that before we came to this world, we humans, all of us, were gathered together in this physical form? No, in our spiritual form. And the Almighty asked us, Alastu bi Rabbikum, am I not your Lord? And we all said in one voice, why not Bala? And the Almighty mentioned that I am doing it so that tomorrow you may not be able to come up with an excuse that you didn't know. Uh, Obviously, one might ask that we don't remember this incident. The answer is that quite often it so happens that even though we do not remember a certain incident that took place in our lives, there are certain other indications that lead us to believe that the incident actually took place. Uh, Sometime in our early childhood, we meet with certain accident, have injury, and you still have the mark of that injury, even though you don't remember when that incident took place. Likewise, this incident took place before we came to this world, and we don't have the memory of it, but we have within us a realization and appreciation of it. The Quran mentions that that's why sometimes even those people who either don't believe in God or believe in several gods, when they are in their extremely tight corners in life, they are desperately looking for some way of getting out of their difficulties. They mention God and appeal to Him without even realizing that in normal days they would not acknowledge Him as one and the only God. Uh, that is because God is a reality that's there inside humans, even though uh, normally they may not acknowledge Him. That is why it so happens that even if when a person is not serious about God, about religion, and at times is an atheist, but then when all of a sudden, for one reason or another, comes to realize that God indeed is there, he or she gets emotional. Now, you would not get emotional on realizing that a certain intellectual reality has become clear to you, but you will become emotional if you realize that you have been able to discover somebody who was already there. You had a relationship with him, but you had forgotten or ignored him. So, in other words, the Quran tells us that, like our moral appreciation or aesthetic sense, we also have a very clear understanding of the presence of God inside us. But the third way we humans acknowledge reality is through our intellectual reasoning. Intellect is a system which categorizes data, uh, analyzes it, and comes to conclusions. It doesn't have information on its own, but the information that is fed into it, like a computer, it manipulates it and brings results. Uh, the information that is fed into uh, human intellect is the information that we get through our sense perception. We see, we hear, we smell, we touch, and we taste. And the information gets into our system, into our intellect. Likewise, we know things, as I said, intuitively, and that also happens to be a source of information for our intellect. And then the intellect does its work and brings forth certain conclusions, draws inferences, and it does it remarkably. The Quran, as I mentioned earlier, very strongly urges the reader to not only use his intellect, but also look at the world around him. The Quran asks the reader to look at the universe, the world that he's a part of. Uh, so there are a number of verses in the Quran which are requiring believers, uh, requiring the reader to have a look at the world around and to come to certain conclusions. For example, in verse 163 of Surah Al-Baqarah, the second chapter, and verse 190 of Surah Al Imran, third chapter, it's the same style of presentation. I'll mention the second reference because it's a smaller verse. It says, إن في خلق السماوات والأرض واختلاف الليل والنهار لآيات لأولي الألباب. Indeed, in the creation of the heavens and the earth, and in the alternating system of the day and the night, there are signs for those who ponder and reflect, who are men of understanding. Now, what exactly is it that the Quran is referring to by asking the reader to use his sense perception to come to conclusions? Well, the Quran says that if we look at the world around us, we would notice that there is tremendous control, discipline in the world that we are living in. Uh, the day appears at a definite, apportioned time, appointed time, and it disappears, and night arrives at a time that is already known. The heavenly bodies, they are moving in their own respective orbits. We know that the crops, they emerge as a consequence of seeds being sown, and rain falls, or what the soil is watered and the sun shines. Uh, the farmer is absolutely confident that the crops are going to sprout. Uh, Likewise, there's so many different laws of nature which human beings have discovered, and they're so confident that they are all functioning and functioning consistently. And as a consequence of understanding and employing them, humans have been able to come up with remarkable scientific discoveries and technological progress. Uh, that's because of the control and discipline that's there in this world. The Quran requires the reader to keenly observe the world around him and to come to this conclusion that there is what is called control, discipline in the life that we are a part of. Secondly, it also draws our attention to look at the fact that the world that we are living in, where there is demonstration of tremendous control and discipline, uh, there is providence as well. Providence is the experience that we are being provided for. We are living in a world where we as humans are vulnerable. We need so many different facilities without which we would not survive. We need food to eat, water to drink, we need air to breathe, and we need so much more. for us to be able to live as human beings. And lo and behold, whatever we need is available in this system. So, not only that, what we are experiencing in this life is that it's a disciplined world, remarkably disciplined. What is also very amazing is the fact that the discipline that's there in this world is making sure that we as humans and many other species, they all survive by being supplied with, provided with what they need. Then we are also required to look at the fact that there is mercy in the system that we are a part of. In that, what we are experiencing is what we like. As they say, we are loving it, even though we didn't do anything about it. We didn't deserve it. You see, if you do something to deserve and you get what you deserve, that is called justice, fair play. But mercy is something more than that. You don't deserve and you're getting it. So, what you find in this world is a tremendous display of mercy. We humans never deserve what we are getting, and yet we are getting in life things, facilities, blessings in abundance. Also, we are asked to observe the fact our intellect is asked to appreciate that the world that we are living in is also displaying wisdom. There is demonstration of wisdom all around. By wisdom, what it means is that there is very clear underlying planning that's there, which enables things to happen the way they ought to happen, the way they are planned to happen. So there are certain projects which need to be completed, and there are certain needs that need to be satisfied. And then there are systems in place which ensure that what is needed is actually achieved. For instance, we humans, when we are born as children, when we are kids, uh, when we come to this world, we are extremely vulnerable. Probably the most vulnerable child of all is a human child. You know, it takes us months, even years, before we become independent. And prior to that, immediately after coming to this world, and honestly, even before that, so many problems that we create as humans. You know, uh, we need attention, we need food, and so many other things. If human child is left to his her own, it would die, would not survive. And you know what? Even before we come to this world, there's already preparation that is underway, and there are arrangements available to welcome us in the form of mother in particular, the father and other relatives prepared to welcome us, eagerly waiting for our arrival. And it so happens that when we come to this world, our survival is dependent upon the care that we're going to get, and care is what we get. And that's because before we come to this world, there is love, sympathy, concern in abundance that has been made available uh, in our parents and other relatives who take care of us. So, what I'm saying is that uh, there is wisdom, there is planning, there are projects, there are ultimate goals which need to be achieved, and there are arrangements made to make sure that those needs are adequately met. So the Quran tells us that, if we are to use our intellect properly and we are to look at the world around us, we cannot escape the reality that there are certain conclusions that have to be drawn. We can't run away from them. A, there is discipline, order, control in this world. B, that control and order is doing one thing for sure, and that is providing for our needs. C, what we are getting is what we like. We are enjoying it, and yet we didn't do anything about it. We didn't do anything to deserve it. and 4, we are witnessing in this world a spectacle where there are a number of different things happening, and they are happening in a manner that they are achieved through a certain planning, which then gets underway, it's implemented, and those goals are achieved. So, all these features, discipline, providence, mercy, wisdom, are there. Now, if an intelligent mind is able to come to those conclusions and has not been able to as yet figure out as to why it's all happening, uh, the mind has to be puzzled. It would be like a jigsaw puzzle which has bits and pieces thrown across here and there, but the total picture is not completely clear. The Quran tells us that those pieces, if they are to be put together properly, there is only one correct picture that would emerge from this puzzle, and that's the understanding of God. Therefore, the Quran says, Allahu nuru samawati wal ard. In Surah Nur, chapter 24, verse 35, belief in God is the light of the heavens and the earth. In other words, if you believe in God, you will come to understand the answer. You will reach the solution answer to this puzzle. And you will come out of the darkness of ignorance, and you will be able to embrace the reality of truth. The Quran tells us that it's not possible for us to look at God in this world. That's what the trial of this life is. That's the way it has been designed. However, we can come close to God. We can understand God. We can imagine His presence through appreciating His attributes. So we cannot see Him physically, but we can actually see Him intellectually through appreciating His attributes which are at display, which are functioning. We are informed that God's attributes are all complete. We are informed that all great good attributes belong to God. And we are also informed that God's attributes are all simultaneously functioning. Uh, the last thing, we, even though can't see God, even though we cannot talk to Him, we can still come very close to Him. How? Through appreciating His attributes and behaving in a way that we are adjusting to the understanding of His attributes. For instance, one of His attributes is that He is knowledgeable. His knowledge is perfect. He knows everything. He knows what I'm saying. He knows what I'm doing. He knows what I do in the open and what I do when I'm all alone. When I do in the light of the day, and what I do in the darkness of night. When and obviously He knows what's there in my heart, what I am intending. When I come to realize it, and when I think about it, I take His attribute of knowledge seriously, uh, and I start behaving because I know that my God is looking at me. I come close to God. I have a realization of God which enables me to come close to Him, not physically, but spiritually. Likewise, we know that God is wise, and whatever decisions are implemented, we try our best to do what we think is right. But when things happen a certain way, and we know that God is wise, His decisions cannot be unwise, and we feel satisfied, or we feel good about Him, and become close to Him, and so on and so forth. So, what I'm trying to say is that the whole system of the understanding of concept of God in Islam, in the Quran, is so very neatly, clearly, logically explained that you don't have to you don't have to feel dejected or disappointed to tell yourself that, look here, even though I'm not understanding, but what else can I do? I've got to believe in what I'm being asked to believe in. So we have been asked to believe in the system of beliefs and faith uh, by being made to understand logically that what we have been asked to acknowledge is indeed logical and there's no other way out but to acknowledge and believe in them. That's from me. Uh, I'm now available for your questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zahir. That was a great um, talk. So now we will open up for questions. If anybody has a question on Zoom, please unmute your microphone and start asking. And if you don't want to ask, just type in your question and I'll read it out to Dr. Zahir. Okay. While they're thinking, Dr. Zahir, I'll start asking, um, questions that I think might be might offer some clarification. One that you mentioned a promise, that Allah Ta'ala, alastu bi rabbikum, that we made with Allah Ta'ala way before when we were born, right? If we made a promise in such a distant past that we don't even remember it, then what purpose does it really serve? How does it um, compel me to believe in God just because of something that happened to me at a time when I can't even remember? Like, if my mother made me make a promise when I was a year old, I don't remember it now, and I shouldn't be compelled. I shouldn't be held responsible for that promise, right?
What if the promise that you made to your mother, you don't remember it, but there's something inside you that causes you to feel that there was something that I did. You see, in the case of God, uh, there is already within us an inclination, call it, for, for want of a better expression, there is already a bias for God. And that's because we had already met him and we got this experience in the background. That's what I said, that, at times when a person is distanced from God because of different reasons, and then for one reason or another realizes that after all there is a God, the person is, gets emotional. Uh, there is a feeling that I have come back to somebody that I already knew, someone who is familiar, someone that I think my contact with him is giving me a feeling of comfort. So the Quran is telling us that yes, we don't have the clear memory of when it happened and how it happened. Had the memory been there, then there wouldn't have been a trial. The trial of this life is that even though we do not have a memory of our experience or meeting with God, we still have a feeling of it, which is there in the background. And when this other way of approaching God in the form of intellectual reasoning comes to a certain conclusion, uh, it's not simply an intellectual satisfaction that we get. We're actually emotional about it because we have been able to meet and discover somebody who was already there.
Very well. Thank you so much. So again, if anybody has a question, please feel free to unmute your microphone and start asking. Um, Atif Saab has sent a question in the text. What was Atif Saab? This question was actually answered in one of the previous sessions. So I suggest that you watch that. I wouldn't waste everybody's time going over this question again. Let me see if there are any questions on our Facebook and YouTube. Okay, I'm not seeing anything. Okay, so while I'm looking, maybe if you can answer this, that there are so many signs, as you mentioned, for the existence of God. If my intuition tells me that there's God, and there are so many signs in the physical world out there that I can perceive, then how come there are so many people who are atheists? I mean, it, if it's all that natural, then why are so many people atheists?
That's a good question. Actually, if you won't have come up with this question, I would have asked this question. That's the $1 million question that obviously we're all trying to sort out and grapple with. My understanding is that there are more than one reasons for it. The chief reason that comes to my mind is that this is because of a reaction of the modern world against the unreasonable presentation of religion that was made a by Christianity in the medieval Western European history, when alongside the monarchs, the kings, the church, they came together and they created a system which discouraged human intellect from expressing itself. There are so many examples of people getting tortured, discouraged for coming up with intelligent ideas simply because they went against the understanding, the beliefs of the church. The example of Galileo is one prominent example. He came up with a very intelligent idea that, after all, this planet of ours is not the center of the existence. Because it ran contrary to the belief of the church then, he was forced to take his views back. And there's so many numerous examples that were there in, uh, you know, a number of years, centuries, that later on, when as a consequence of a number of changes, Renaissance, Enlightenment, Industrial Revolution, Scientific Revolution, democracy, etc., the New World emerged by defeating the kings, monarchs, as well as the church. The people who were at the helm of the affairs of the modern world had in their memory very negative understanding, perception of religion. So it's a reaction to the orthodox religion that has caused people to be drawn away from formal religion. And obviously, what is at the heart of that religion, what is the biggest, strongest pillar of religion, is God. So God also got rejected. That's one reason. The other reason is that when you are in a state of reaction against a certain ideology, uh, you then come up with your own views, which then you support very strongly, and you're very staunch about it. And then, in a debate, people don't tend to look at the other point of view with an open mind. And at the back of their mind is that fear that, if we start acknowledging God, we'll have to then probably acknowledge religion. And then the whole idea of religion and the way it actually worked negatively comes to their mind. So they came up with this understanding that now that we humans have been able to answer all those questions which were earlier on answered by God, we don't need any further understanding and concept of God. Now that we know that we started from a big bang and we have come to become what we are now as a consequence of the process of evolution, we know how rain falls, and we know how earthquake comes, and we know how diseases they emerge, and so on and so forth. All those questions, which historically were answered by God, are now answered by science. And therefore, a modern human being doesn't need to have the unnecessary concept of God, which was some time ago, okay, useful, but now it really has overlived its utility. My very simple answer to this whole explanation is that whatever the Big Bang theory and the theory of evolution, etc., are doing is that they are answering the question how. They're not answering the question who. Uh, well, the Quran tells us that this brilliant world that we are living in and we're observing is actually run by God. He is doing it. Whether it started from Big Bang or something else, that's less relevant. What is important is that God is doing all this. He is the one who is responsible for creating this entire existence, and He's running the show. Just a brief mention about the theory of evolution. Uh, Obviously, the Quran is not presenting Darwin's theory of evolution, but there are a number of verses, and probably I'll find time in one of these presentations to give an idea of the fact that the Quran presents indirectly, in a subtle way, obviously, because it's not the Quran's subject matter uh, directly. It mentions and gives reasons for us to believe that humans came about in a way that there was definitely a process of evolution that preceded them. And there are verses which are clearly pointing at that reality.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zahir. That will be really awesome if you can touch base on the evolution part in one of the later classes, as you mentioned. I think that will really help us all out. Um, okay, so let me, if again, I'm reminding you guys, if anyone on Zoom wants to unmute their microphone and start asking, please do so. Please don't be shy.
Dr. Saab, I have a question. Basically, I mean, I understand what you're saying that pretty much Ustad has also mentioned this several times that the science does not answer the question of why, it's just answer the question of how. And no other field of knowledge has ever presented, even presented the any alternative of why answer except religion. But people ask that why should we believe what religion is presenting? Why can't we just say that we don't know? What's wrong with that?
You see, we humans, we've come to this world with a personality which has certain features, one of which is to know what the reality is. And that brings me back to my second point, or was it the first one, where I mentioned that we already know God intuitively. There is something inside us which is constantly reminding us, even though in a very subtle way, that there is this ultimate being who is waiting for us to acknowledge him. And the world around us has been designed in a manner that there is nothing else that can satisfy humans. When I say satisfy, I mean a feeling deep inside which makes somebody feel comfortable that what I have arrived at is actually what the truth is. So it's this deep yearning from inside that causes us to look for the right answer. And when we go for the wrong answers, uh, even if we are trying to plead for its case very strongly, we're trying to bring about arguments. The Quranic claim is that those arguments deep inside humans are not satisfying them. And that's what the Quran said, that on the day of judgment, the Almighty is going to then let people know that they knew from inside, and yet they were for one reason or another not prepared to acknowledge. What are those reasons that cause people not to acknowledge? Well, basically, the glamour of this world, you know, the immediate surroundings of ours have been designed in a manner for the sake of testing us, that they are glamorous, attractive, they are immediately rewarding, and the immediate rewards and results that we come across, that we achieve, are so attractive that we forget the fact, we forget the writing on the wall, that we are very soon going to leave this world. So the Quran tells us that unless and until we are prepared to think beyond death, beyond this life, we will never be serious about understanding realities and in particular about God. So the reason why the modern man is not inclined to believe in God is that he's not willing to uh, think beyond this life, beyond death, because it's only then that he or she is going to take this question seriously. And the answer to this question as to who created us is not available uh, very at without any struggle. Uh, it's not cheaply available. It's available to the person who's actually determined, who's actually concerned, and is desperately looking for the answer. And for all those people who are looking, searching for the answer desperately, well, the answer is very clearly written and visible. But those who are not interested, God says that I'm not going to make my understanding available to him.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zahir. Farhan Saab, did that answer your question, or do you have a follow-up question?
I mean, if nobody has other questions, I mean, I have another question, but if I would prefer if somebody else has question, let's ask it.
Okay, so if anybody has a question, please unmute your microphone and ask. Otherwise, we'll let Farhan Saab have a follow-up question.
It seems that God is quite clear to everybody. So there's no more question.
Go ahead, Farhan Saab.
Another objection that I mean I hear very often, and I would like you to elaborate on that. That this the theists, especially Saint Augustine, they he brought up with the argument of God is that is the cause and effect argument, right? It says that okay, because we see everything around us is an effect of a cause. If there is a table, somebody created it. If there is a and going on so forth, and that if the world is there, somebody must have created it. So the atheists bring up the objection that this argument is faulty because why do we then stop at God? Who created God if the cause and effect argument is valid?
Yes, I think I didn't bring up it in my basic presentation uh, that the Quran doesn't allude to that argument. This argument of the first cause is the argument that is presented by some people who believe in God, the theists, uh, from their own minds. They've worked up a logic, and that logic is presented by them to people, and obviously then there is a rebuttal, and then the debate goes on. Uh, the Quran, surprisingly or not surprisingly, does not touch upon it. He just tells us that God is there. You know that He's there. You've experienced Him, and look at the world around you yourself, and you would find that you will be able to observe the work of the result of God's different attributes. This whole argument of the first cause is obviously debated, but I'm sure that you know that those who present the case of God through this particular argument, one of the things that they mention is that, what we're saying is that every created thing needs a creator. Whether God is also created or not is what we don't know. So this question is premature unless we meet him and see as for ourselves as to whether he is also created and therefore he also needs a creator, or he is not created and therefore he is the first cause. But obviously that's something that has to do with logic. I believe that these questions and these answers are basically shut up calls to each other. uh, the Quran has therefore distanced itself from this kind of a presentation and presents the case of God naturally in a way that a person is compelled to think seriously that the world that I am living in cannot be justified unless I believe in a God who is controller, who is provider, who is merciful, who is wise, and who has all the other great attributes, all of them in a way that they are complete, infinite, and they're all simultaneously functioning.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zaheer. So we're, the time is up for this class. So hopefully all of you will join us again tomorrow evening. So Dr. Zaheer, this was a great class because, it gives us the evidence, the proof of God. And that's, I feel that once we start believing in things that we believe in, on the basis of evidence, on the basis of proof, then a lot of things become much clearer later on. So again, this was a great class. Jazakallah.
Thank you.
I'll see you
Assalamu
inshallah
alaikum.
tomorrow. Wa alaikum salam.